What if I told you that Samsung actually put effort into their budget smartphones again? This is the new Galaxy A07, and while it's not a huge leap forward, Samsung actually made some real improvements on this device that could actually make it worth the price. Let's get into what's new on the Galaxy A07. So right off the bat, you'll notice that the camera bump is now a single unified module. So both lenses sit together instead of floating separately like it does on the A06. You'll also really notice that the body has been trimmed down a bit, so it is thinner, which makes it feel more refined while holding it and not like a thick piece of plastic. And for the first time in the new A0 series, we are now getting an IP rating, which on the A07 is IP54, meaning it's resistant to dust and light splashes, of course. But obviously it's not waterproof, so you can't go swimming with it for long periods of time. But what's cool is that's something we've never seen in this price range with Samsung devices, so it's pretty cool that this is now becoming a thing. And then when moving on to the display, the biggest difference you'll notice is the fact that it now has a 90 Hz refresh rate, which is amazing because every device Samsung had at that price never came with anything higher than 60 Hz. So now we're seeing a really big improvement over there. And that's a big step for Samsung in competing with the budget range smartphones when it comes to other brands, because other brands are really pushing for 120 Hz or 90 Hz in that price range. Now, the display quality, on the other hand, is pretty much the same as the previous A06, but surprisingly, I did notice a slight difference in the color accuracy from the A07. You do notice that it's better. I don't know if it's because of the size of the screen, because it's been made a bit bigger, but the color and everything looks a little better. And unfortunately also, yes, Samsung has kept the front camera notch. I have no idea why. I really think this should not be a thing anymore, but it's still there. For the display, it's not perfect, but there is a larger improvement now when it comes to your scrolling animations and so on. So that's a great step up from the previous A06. Moving on to the performance side of things and what's happening on the inside of the device, here's where things get a little more exciting. Under the hood, Samsung swapped out the old chip for a Helio G99 processor, which is a surprisingly solid performer for a budget smartphone. Which means everyday stuff like social media, light gaming, and just going through your normal tasks should feel a lot smoother, and I have noticed that a bit when messing around with it compared to the previous A06. I mean, when I ran 3D Mark on the device, just doing a little bit of a stress test, over here it really shows a big performance increase over the previous A06. And from my tests that I got, it's about a 65% increase in power. That's huge, like over 50% increase in power already just is insane, especially for a device that isn't much more expensive than the previous A06. The models that we get on this device is 4GB or 6GB of RAM, depending on which one you want. And there's a 64GB or 128GB of storage model as well. So you do have some options if your budget is really tight, but if you can, I really suggest getting yourself either the 6GB with 128GB of storage, because that will help you a lot in the long run. I would not suggest getting a 64GB storage model. You're going to run out of space really quickly. But thankfully, the 128GB of storage model that I got with 4GB of RAM, it's really affordable and very little more priced over the A06. Like, it's not more, if not even the same price. It actually just all depends on where you live at the moment. Then we'll move on to the cameras of the A07. Here also, not much has changed really. You still got a 50 megapixel main sensor with a 2 megapixel depth sensor, and then of course an 8 megapixel selfie camera. So the photos are of course pretty much what you would be expecting from a budget A07 device, which means it's basically decent in good lighting, but definitely not so decent in low lighting conditions. But since Samsung improved the image processing just slightly because of One UI 7, you'll notice that there is a bit more consistency in color and sharpness when it comes to your images. So it's not staying exactly the same, but you are getting a slight improvement over there. But I wouldn't call it anything amazing. Something else that didn't really change much is also the battery, which is still sitting at 5,000 milliamps per hour, and it's your classic Samsung move that you'll get. But honestly, I'll say it's fine. It's a reliable battery that can get you easily through a full day or possibly even more. The upgrade though that you probably won't notice, but it's there, is the 25 watt-hour wired charging speed. So you finally actually have a bit more speed when you need to top up. The only thing you'll have to do really is to buy the correct charging block, which would have to be 15 watts or 25 watts per hour to get the most out of charging your device. So that will unfortunately incur you an extra cost. Out of the box with the A07, you'll be getting One UI 7 based on Android 15, which is pretty impressive for a budget phone. There's of course still a little bit of lag here and there, which is to be expected of a lower end hardware running Samsung device with the heavy skin that it has. But what's also really shocking about the new release of the A07 is Samsung is offering 6 years of major OS updates for you. And that's super wild support for a phone as cheap as this. I don't think I've ever seen that on really any other device. So even if you're someone that's on a tight budget and this is really the only device you can afford for the next 4 to 5 years, you at least have the promise of still getting One UI 10 or 11 whenever it decides to be released. So you'll be good for the time being. And that honestly to me has to be an awesome thing that Samsung offers. I'm just curious how well they will stick to that. And so I'm going to keep this device to check in the next maybe 4 or 5 years if they really stick to that. I really hope they do though. Another thing I really hope that doesn't happen is that those skins that they have to apply to this device, the newer maybe One UI 10 or 11, doesn't become too much for the device's performance that it can handle right now. At least they did give it a really nice chip to be able to support future OSs, but we'll see in future how seriously bad it could get or if it will really stand up to those 6 years that they give it. Now finally, you're probably wondering what this device sells for, and I'm gonna tell you it's really not that bad. So in South Africa, this device is selling for 2,500 Rand on the Samsung website and wherever else you wanna buy it, for the 4 gigabytes of RAM with 128 gigabytes of storage model. And if you're in the US, they sell for around $140, $150, somewhere around there. And for what this device really offers, a fresh design, smoother 90Hz screen, a better chip, and long-term support, the Galaxy A07 might just be one of the best value phones Samsung put out in a while. Of course, in their budget series. I really do think Samsung is starting to care again about their budget crowd. And I must say, it really shows with the A07. And if you want me to do a full comparison of the A07 and the A06 side by side, do let me know down in the comments below.